the meeting is to have this group talk about the knowledge and experience we've had in pulling together to look at the documents that we gathered. I'd like to begin our session by having each of us introduce ourselves to the rest of the crowd, and then we'll follow the agenda. I'm Barbara Addison Reed, and chair of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee.
Happy to go next. Nick Priest from the Select Board and the Vice Chair of this committee.
Thank you.
Carl Foss, on the school committee and also secretary for this committee. Or secretary in name. I'm not sure how well I'm doing in practice.
You're doing okay.
Yeah.
Nancy?
Hi, I'm Nancy Bonacera. I'm a town meeting member in Precinct 4. I'm also the co-chair of the Burlington Equity Coalition and vice president of Burlington Against Racism.
And Joanne?
Hello, everyone. Joanne Faust, Human Resources Director for the Town of Burlington and the Burlington Schools.
Thank you. So let's get started on the agenda. And what we identified first is the presentation of the definitions for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that's what this committee is addressing. The definitions that we have defined here are from the thesaurus, and they give us the various comments that are made. And for diversity, as an example, that represents variety, assortment, multiplicity, and mixture. And what we've listed there are the races that are provided to us by the federal government, from African American, Asian American, Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, Hispanic, Latino, Indigenous, Native Americans, Alaskan Native, 2 or more races. We also have defined equity, which is fairness, impartiality, justice, and fair play. Inclusion, which is addition, enclosure, insertion, and attachment. And we also have defined the words policy and procedure. As we talk today, we're going to be meeting both with Amy Warfield and Joanne Faust to talk about the documents that I gathered from both participants. And what the committee has done is to share copies of the 21 documents. And as a result of our review of the documents, then we came up with questions that we want to present. How are you, Saeed?
I am well, thank you, BJ. How are you? How's everybody else doing?
Everybody's fine, and I want to make sure that you met Joanne, who's joining us.
Hi, Joanne. Thank
Okay.
you, and my apologies again for the delay in joining. I was running behind, and then I had some computer issues.
Well, you're here.
I am.
That's great. So we're going to go to page 2 in our agenda, and there we have the documents that were provided by Amy Warfield. Amy has not joined us, so if it's okay with everybody, what we'll do is to go over to Joanne's discussion topics and do that first. Does that make sense? So you'll go over to page 4. That begins with Joanne's name listed at the top of Human Resources Director for the Town of Burlington and Burlington Public Schools. So what we're doing is the title that's listed on the document is what's printed in the printouts that we received. And then our assessment, which was what was included when we reviewed the document, and then any questions or any comments that we want to make. So we'll start at the beginning of page 4. And there we're looking at the document that is the Administrative and Professional Classification Plan for the year of 2022. And this document provided group titles and a compensation plan. Contract ends in this year, 2022. And our reference is that there are no reference to diversity, equity, and inclusion in the language that's in the document. Any other comments? The next one we looked at is the AFL-CIO, State Council and Municipal Employee Association, which is July 1st, 2019 to June 30th, 2022. We looked at Article 28, which provides language for non-discrimination, and the categories are age, sex, marital status, race, color, creed, disability, national origin, political affiliation, or other classification protected by state and federal law. The contract ends June 30th, 2022. And in the contract, there is no reference to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Any comments?
Sorry, BJ, are you looking for us to comment individually or hold like more holistic questions to the end?
No, do questions now.
Okay, all right. I didn't want to interrupt flow or anything. Okay, so I have a question. So Joanne, this applies to kind of everything on this list, but if we can take them in any order based on your knowledge and expertise. Where does the town's authority end and the state and the federal authority pick up? And for this committee, right? So our goal is to make recommendations to the select board at the end of the day on how we can make better, do better when it comes to DEI. And I think that knowing where those lines are will help us tremendously.
I agree, Nick. Thank you. That is an essential question for all of the groups that we're looking at tonight. So I do think that would fall under the other categories that we're going to talk about. We do need to follow the requirements of state and federal laws regarding non-discrimination against protected classes that the state and federal laws protect, which are listed in many of our contracts, and those classes do get amended from time to time, added more or added in, and we do follow that. In terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion, I am not aware of any state or federal laws that discuss that. So to put that into a contract, that would need to be something that the town, is expressing its commitment to, and I believe that we do have that commitment, and capitalizing that in our contract. And so that is something that we would entertain putting before our unions in negotiations.
Follow-up question. Knowing obviously that the town's committed to this, right? From your perspective, from a human resources perspective, what is there something that we should be focused on at like a higher level? Like, I know that a couple times we've talked about how our current diversity statement was last touched in like '87. And I think that this committee can actually take a look at that. But in terms of other recommendations that we can make, to go kind of above and beyond state and federal law, and ensure that we're covering how we feel we should be covering, off on this stuff as it pertains to the town of Burlington. Would it be like I don't know, just like a statement, like an amendment, like how would we broach this conversation? Because before we even say, yeah, let's talk to the unions, right? Like we need to know exactly how, and this may very well be a question for town council, but from your perspective, I'm just trying to gauge that.
We need to start somewhere, and I think this is part of a larger conversation. we do need to, put it out there that this is something that we're committed to. This is our statement. This is, we need to have that information readily available and, out there for people to find. But I also think we need to back it up. I think, our actions and where we reach out and what we do and, how our procedures, I think, need to show that commitment as well. We need to, walk the walk and talk the talk. I think it all needs to be there. I think it all needs to go hand in hand because we could do all the outreach that we want to do. We can have the statements on our website, but, if the feeling's not there on the other end, it's not going to be effective. So I think it all is going to work together. So, and once again, it is part of a larger conversation that I think we should all have.
Agreed. Thank you.
Other comments? Thank you. The next document we have is AFL, CIO, State Council, and Public Works, which also ends June 30th, 2022. Article 4 looks at discrimination, and it's referenced by foremen, superintendents, but no other categories. There's no reference in the contract for race, religion, creed, color, national origin, age, sex, or disability, or other classifications protected by federal and state law. And there's no reference to DEI. Other comments?
Hey, Joanne,
But
say there. Quick, thank you, BJ, for the opportunity. A quick question here. So, um, it to my untrained eye, it seems like a huge miss if a document like the AFL-CIO, council, state council and public works document does not include a reference to abide by state and federal laws as far as non-discrimination is concerned. Would you agree to that? And does that I guess, do you agree that such language is missing from this document?
I do agree that it is missing. However, it doesn't exempt the union from that law and those regulations applying to them. We will see a little bit further down our anti-harassment policy and anti-discrimination policy that does apply to all staff, and they do receive that on an annual basis. We do train staff on that on an annual basis. They all know that it applies to them, and they all understand that it's something that's important to us. I agree it's not in the contract. Maybe it should be there, but again, it doesn't exempt them from falling under that purview.
Okay, thank you. One follow-up question, BJ, if I may. So if a town employee experiences discrimination, or if they've perceived that they are being discriminated against, is there a process for them to reach out or seek remedy for that occurrence?
Absolutely, absolutely. They would reach out to me. They have many avenues to reach out to, and this is what we train them on as well. It's in our policy. They can reach out to any supervisor. They can reach out to me. They can reach out to the state and federal agencies if they wish. We do like to take care of issues in-house first and foremost if we can. It's usually a lot more efficient that way. But they do have remedies. They do have places that they can reach out. And our supervisors know that if someone comes to them, they come to me, and we do investigate each and every one.
Last question, if I may, BJ, on the same topic. So is there a third-party managed hotline that is available to employees of the town as well?
What type of a hotline? For
So,
what purpose?
so for example, if let's say an employee of the town, and my supervisor is the one who is discriminating against me. So naturally, I won't be comfortable in going and speaking to that individual. And let's say I'm not comfortable in speaking with you either. I would rather report that anonymously, and then let the cards fall where they may. So does that kind of an avenue exist with the
It
town
does
of
not
Burlington?
exist. I'm sorry, it does not exist for the town of Burlington. I did forget to say that employees can also talk to the town administrator if they're more comfortable. That's another option. If they're uncomfortable with all the options they have here in town, we don't have a hotline, but that's when they would be able to go to either the MCAD, the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination, which does have a number they could call, or the EEOC, which is the federal agency.
Okay, thank you.
Joanne, are you the chief negotiator for union contracts, or is there someone else who manages that?
That's the town administrator.
Is there an opportunity to review what the town is asking for when you enter into negotiations?
Absolutely.
Okay. So because the language is missing, it means that the town has not put forth the language that they want to have included in the contract. Or if it was put out, then the union denied it, and that's why it's not there now. So there may be an opportunity to consider adding the appropriate language when the contract is negotiated this spring and goes into effect July 1.
Agreed.
So it's just a thought on suggesting it. I would also say that because you're in human resources, you are the person that people should reach out to get the support that they need in the town and in the school department. So it's, yes, we do have people here that serve us as the town administrator. There are contacts, but there are also key people that we can talk with and begin to address issues before they do go outside and get handled by another organization, which can be confusing and may not have a positive outcome that we want. Okay. Any other thoughts? The next item is the International Association for Firefighters. And there they do have a contract under Article 1 that talks about not to discriminate against any employee by reason of non-membership in the union. The town and the union shall discriminate against any employee on the basis. And they give the various categories. And then the contract ends June 30th. And there's no reference to diversity, equity, or inclusion. Comments? The next one is Burlington Police Command Officers, which ends June 30th, 2022. There is no discussion about discrimination. There is no reference to diversity, equity, and inclusion in the contract. Any comments? Burlington Police Patrolmen's Association, which ends June 30th, 2022. Article 1 talks about the chief and the association agree not to discriminate on against any employee covered by the contract on account of the various categories. Contract ends June 30th, and there is no discussion about diversity, equity, or inclusion. Comments?
Just a question. Joanne, do you have an idea of when these contracts will be negotiated?
We will start negotiations within the next month or two for each of these. Each of these contracts you see expire at the end of the fiscal year.
Right. Thank you.
So if I could ask a question more of this committee then to Joanne, and this is probably coming from my own place of privilege and not fully understanding. So everyone, please bear with me for a moment. When we talk about discrimination and having a discrimination policy and not discriminate against people based on these factors, is that not in effect talking about diversity, or am I misinterpreting and we should also have something that is a part of like each of the department's mission statements that ask them to like diversify the staff? Like when, like what are we hoping for, and what am I missing?
Comments?
So if I can take a stab at to answer your question there, Nick. So if you recall from a moment or two ago, to paraphrase Joanne's words, the commitment is there, right, from the town to go above and beyond what the state and federal laws state, about not discriminating against anybody for whatever statutory clauses or groups there may be. So we're looking to go beyond that, right? That's the bare minimum that the law requires, that we don't discriminate against anyone based on race and religion and gender orientation and so on and so forth, right? So we are now looking to go beyond that and talk about how do we ensure that uh, that the general population and the employees, for example, perceive the town of Burlington to be an inclusive town, to be where there is equity and inclusion and diversity and so on and so forth. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it definitely does. And I think stopping at the Patrolmen's Association is probably the best place to have this conversation, because if you look at the demographics of the police department, what Chief Brown and Chief Kent, primarily before him, did was make a huge effort to diversify, our patrolmen, right? We have, multiple female officers, multiple officers of race, bilingual officers. I mean, it's, the Burlington BPD of today versus 30 years ago is vastly different and reflects much more of our community, right? Which I think is fantastic. So to Joanne's point, like the BPD has walked the walk, even if there isn't like very, very specific language in here. So um, yes, that does help. So I think that we can definitely look to broaden the language in this particular case.
Right. So in the BPA's case, the BPPA's case, we would basically be, by this recommendation, we would be asking them to to enshrine in words what they're doing, right? And I agree. I've been living and or associated with Burlington for the past 2 decades now, and yes, the police department is a lot more diverse now than what it was 20 years ago. So yes, they are doing excellent work. We just need them to. We're recommending that they include verbiage and take credit for what they're doing.
Nan-
Yeah, thanks. I'll just jump in. I agree with what Said said about, we want to say we're going above and beyond the minimum of, getting rid of discrimination. I just want to add in that, diversity, equity, and inclusion are relatively new terms that are now being used in most, workplaces. Like they really need to have that. So I think it's something, Burlington needs to adopt to like, move into this current time. And again, like what Said said, it's also just having that language, so we're explicitly stating, hey, it's not just about, hey, people can't discriminate. We also welcome diversity, want things to be equitable, and we want this to be a town of inclusion. So
The reality also comes from the numbers that we look at. What is the makeup of race in the town, for the employees in the town, for in the school system? And one of the things that you do annually is to look up does the statistics tell you, with regard to race and the acceptance of people, and compare them from year to year to year to see that there's progress. When we look at the data, Joanne submitted some new information and I've done a calculation on that, but we can talk about how Burlington compares to Boston, Massachusetts, and the United States with regard to people of color, and what are the percents that look like compared to all races. So that's a way of looking at the progress. And yes, it needs to be a part of the mission statement. And what's behind that is the values that govern our behavior and how we accept everyone as an equal and provide the same kind of opportunities available to everyone, not just Caucasian people. So that's the kind of action that we're looking for to see it happen. Our pictures all left and they just came back. Did it do the same thing on your computer?
We lost you for a second, your picture, but then you came back.
Okay, there you are. Now I see you. It was like we're disappearing and coming back. Okay, the next item on our list is the town of Burlington, and this is for part-time compensation plan. And that is under 20 hours a week. And it was effective as of July 1st, 2021. The adjustment was 1.75%. There is no discussion about discrimination. The contract ends this year in 2022, and there's no reference to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Any comments or thoughts? Nancy, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. We don't see your picture.
Oh. Can you hear me?
Yes,
I can see Nancy.
I can also see her.
there you are. It could be my screen. I don't know. Okay, the next item on our list is the Town of Burlington Personnel Rules and Regulations amended June 1, 2021. So what you have here are references, and there are some questions. There is an anti-harassment policy, Article 47A. Sexual harassment policy, Article 47B. There were questions about Section 1.1-1. Should the first paragraph be updated with additional categories such as ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender identity, etc.? That was a question that was presented. So, Joanne, your thoughts?
Actually taking a look at it right now. I think what we need to do first is add in any other classification that's protected by state or federal law. I see that missing. So I think that's first and foremost. But I do think that's a good place and opportunity to put the overall commitment and statement of DEI.
Okay. The next one is Section 2.1-4. Should recruitment address affirmative action policy? In Section C, which stipulates both internal and external job posting be launched simultaneously. Joanne?
I think that will be something that will need to be discussed in conjunction with the town administrator. And we also have some requirements in our contract that we need to post internally first before we go externally. So we do have those limitations as well. So I don't think that's something that we could overall make a change to right away.
Can I ask? Oh, sorry. I was just asking if those are part of the union contracts, having the internal posting first. Okay.
Correct.
What are the thoughts of the committee based on internal first and not external.
In terms of it as a way of operation?
Oh,
I mean, I think that, you know, in general, it's fairly standard practice, to my knowledge, more than just within municipalities, to open it up to internal applicants first for their, you know, opportunity to apply to a position, either whether it be for a lateral move or promotion. You know, so I mean, I don't mind it. Um, you know, at which point, you know, I think that any standard affirmative action would still apply, of course, you know. But that I think that it's all right. And then if we feel as though, you know, we're not getting a proper pool, or the right, you know, candidates for that position from our internal applicants, then, you know, it's going to open up, you know, external anyways. Like I know, you know, Joanne, for our last round of positions up in the admin office, right? They were like it was like said it said in the application, you know, preference to, you know, folks who applied before a certain date, even, right? You know, whether or not you were internal, just if you had your application in, you know, fast, you had, you know, some preference, which I think is fine as well, because it, you know, it rewards people who are really looking to, you know, hit the ground running with well, my brain just stopped working when it and so too the words. Um, you know, but it's what I was trying to say was that it rewards people who are actively seeking and you know, making that extra effort to apply early. Again, in my mind, regardless of who they are. Um, but that is just one man's opinion.
So
I'll just, oh,
go ahead, Nancy. Go ahead.
oh, okay. I was just gonna add my thoughts. We talked about this a little bit last time. So I think the concern was, you know, if it's an internal posting, then if your pool is already not that diverse, then um maybe you're not giving, you know, you're not including that affirmative action policy. But I think what I had made me pause was just that it was, you know, internal, and then if it's not filled internally, then you post outside. But I do, after like maybe looking around a little more and talking to people, it does look like that's pretty common for positions that aren't like entry level. So like if you're already in, so like you said, with a promotion and such. But the concern we had was like, okay, well, if you're putting this job out and first it goes internally, and then you're saying only if it doesn't get filled internally, then it goes outside. That was the point we were looking at.
Yeah, to add to Nancy what just said, so the other point that if that we talked about was the whole perception complex, right? Or the perception dynamic. So if the perception, or if there is a perception out there that the town is insular, and then postings are first, you know, opened up for internal candidates, and then if the town is unable to find anybody internally, only then they go out to search externally or open to external candidates. It just perpetuates their perception. So is it illegal? Is it going against affirmative action? I'm no lawyer, but I would say no. I would think no, um, because I'm sure there would be so many other regulatory bodies that would come down hard on that very quickly. So again, it's more of from my humble point of view, it's more of a perception issue. And how do we help avoid or correct that perception that, you know, the town again is inclusive, everybody has an equal opportunity, and it's just not to again, to paraphrase your words, Joanne, it's not just a statement. It's, you know, it's this is where the rubber meets the road. So that's essentially where we're coming from on that.
So to add on to that, then, Joanne, you know, would it make sense for us to move away from the notion of internal versus external applicants and only lean into, you know, the preference based on timing of the application submitted?
I still think we need to abide by what the contracts require in terms of internal and external posting. I can say that our entry level positions We do post those concurrently, internal and external. We give everyone the opportunity at the same time because it's not a promotional opportunity. So there's really no problem with the contract for those for the most part. I know that our DPW contract is a little bit different. We do post those internally first. But the internal postings, we do, give everyone internally the same opportunities. We interview everybody who applies internally. And then the external postings, we always have a preferential date for applications, only because we have to start the interviews at some point. It doesn't close the door. I never close the door until a position is filled, but we do have that preferred date that is out there, just so that we do have a time frame so that we know when we have, the bulk of our applications and we can start our interviews at that point.
I have 35 years of working in higher education as the executive of human resources and 9 years working for businesses across New England, the East Coast. And never was it just internal posting first. It was internal and external for the 45 years. So my advice is to consider addressing it in the contract so that we are treating everybody as equal and a participant in the process.
Is this a negotiated point, or is it town policy, or is it some kind of combination?
It is something that needs to be negotiated.
Okay.
Joanne, to your knowledge, are there other towns that have moved away from such, I guess, action or such occurrences where postings are internal only first and then external?
I believe from talking to my colleagues, they operate in the same manner.
All right, thank you. Appreciate your input there. I second BJ's recommendation there, though, that we should consider negotiating this with the different unions. Thank you.
Section 4.7a, should the anti-harassment policy 1997 and the sexual harassment policy both have similar language to achieve results related to both issues? That's a question. Joanne?
These policies do work hand in hand. They are, one is a subset of the other. Sexual harassment is a piece of the overall anti-harassment requirements that we have. And
Do
so
they
we
have
do
this
treat everything identically.
Yeah.
question from the committee?
My comment was just that, yeah, the sexual harassment policy is pretty detailed and laid out there, and you're saying the anti-harassment should follow the same. So I guess the point was, should they just have same language? I know that's may seem a little redundant, but some of the wording might be a little different. And I also think the next point says that it has examples, so maybe there should be examples for other types of harassment.
Section 4.7a-1, should the policy be updated to include other example categories of harassment, such as race, religion, or national origin? Question?
Yeah, I just commented, I jumped ahead. So again, it was just, should that also be included because we have it for the sexual harassment portion?
Section 4.12, professional conduct policy. Third bullet focuses on, quote, treating public in respectful and positive manner. Should this written language include being respectful of diversity? Question.
I think this is just a place to put in the DEI language too.
And of course, the last reference there is that there's no reference to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Any comments? Let's look at the next topic. Affirmative action plan, Town of Burlington, is dated October 6, 1986. Was the affirmative action plan updated at any time since 1986?
No, it is not.
Joanne is saying no. Is there an affirmative action officer who addresses affirmative action policy and procedure for the town of Burlington?
When the plan was established, the Veteran Services Officer Director was appointed the affirmative action officer for the town.
And how long did that person serve? What years?
That was it was effective in 1986. That's when it was designated. That was back when the town was highly civil service, and a lot of the items within this this policy, this plan, were affected by civil service. And so it was decided at that time that was the best place to have that position.
Is there a person like that still who is an officer? Or
We still
has
have a
that
veteran
person retired?
The person at the time is retired, but the position is still in town.
And is that person responsible for affirmative action?
Yeah. Well, that's a position that would work with me as well. We would work together.
And that's written
because the policy, it's not written in the policy, but the plan itself covers the whole operations of the town. Access to programming and access to housing and access, it covers a lot. So there are a lot of pieces of that puzzle where I think we do need to have, a more unified approach.
Is it in that person's job description that that's their responsibility to look out for how that's being done?
I will need to check that.
Okay. Is there an affirmative action officer who addresses affirmative action policy and procedure for the Burlington Public Schools?
I do not know who would be designated as that.
Okay. Thank you. Next item.
Oh, could I just interrupt?
Sure.
So, Joanne, you were saying that it's the VA person that works on the affirmative action right now with you, or?
That's correct. That was the designation.
Okay. And who is the person? I mean, would that be someone we would want to talk to as we continue working on these things?
Our current director is Chris Hannison, and
Mhm.
certainly someone who should be involved.
Okay. And the other comment I had was just we just asked about the schools. I mean, we have Ray Porch there. Do you think he would probably address those things? Even
I
if
think
it's
that
not
would be a
officially called
fantastic idea for Ray.
Yeah. It would make sense.
Thank you. That's a very good idea, Nancy, to have both of those gents. If they can make themselves available for us to speak with.
I'd like to hold that in reserve until we find out what the structure is. Let's move on to the next topic, which is the Burlington Public School website. And here we list the things that were done on December 9th, 2020. and it's the search for records for the access officers, food employee report agreement, equity audit grant of locations at Instar Electric Middlesex Turnpike, bidders list, and agenda minutes. Name and email addresses and phone numbers. There's no reference for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Is there an employment data report available on race for the Burlington Public School principals and teachers? Question. Joanne?
All right. So bullet by bullet, the search that you conducted, a lot of those items would be such as the agenda minutes, the records access officer, that would be housed through the town clerk's office on the town of Burlington's website. They would oversee all of that. I'm not familiar with the other items that you searched for, though. The data report, we can certainly get that to you. Our data office would be able to provide that. Robin Miliano, I know you've reached out to her in the past. She can easily get that for you. And the same thing on the Burlington Public Schools students.
Okay. The Burlington Employment website, it's a career protocol for job search. You have direction for how to apply online, attached resume, cover letter, references, and next steps. Addresses, quote, a robust profile of diversity where perspective and background are embraced to serve the community, close quote. There is no reference to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Any comments?
I think where we hit these places where we hear, there's no reference to DEI, that can definitely be one of our recommendations to the select board, is to say, like, here's our main, like, if we're going to propose a DEI policy, and then specific language that can be plugged in, to all of these, website pages, and, then specific things for contracts. If depending on how you want to break it down, we can make much more specific recommendations. But, my recommendation is, we start high and then build our recommendation down through a tree of all of these different things, and that way we're capturing everything up top in a policy or a statement or whatever's going to be, and then we filter it all down through every piece that we're looking to.
Okay. Town of Burlington, the organizational chart. We have a job class description and locations, but there is no chart. So we're asking, is there an organizational chart for the town of Burlington that not only identifies the name of the position, but the person that's in it, and we see what the structure is, who reports to whom?
I don't believe we have a chart, like the graphic chart that I think you're asking about. We just have the lists.
Okay. Okay, at the bottom of this page, we look at the town of Burlington employment data from June 30th, 2017, and it's compared to Boston, Massachusetts, and the United States, which is the 2010 data. Joanne gave us some statistics on the count. And so we need to look at the comparison for the number of people of color for Burlington. the total was divided by the total number of employees, and so it went from 4.1% to 5.9% for 2017. Using the same data for 2019, it's 7.5%, and 2021, 8.7% for people of color. And so if you look at Burlington in connection with Boston, which is 55.1% people of color and 44.9% Caucasian. Massachusetts, 25.9% people of color, 74.1% Caucasian. And the United States, 38.5% people of color and 61.5% Caucasian. So that's how we are doing the analysis. And you want to, as Joanne suggested, look at how we need to grow. And so Burlington is 5.9, 7.5, 8.7% people of color, compared to 55.1, 25.9, 38.5. So there is opportunity to make it happen.
Oh, BJ, I had some comments about data previously, but I think your Boston, Massachusetts, and USA data are census population demographics, and the Burlington one is just for town employees. So if we look at population demographics percentages for Burlington, I think it's like 26% or something, and then 74% white. So if we wanted to compare these other places, it would have to be like, I don't know, government employees or something. So
These were the data that were provided to me, and they are US Census data for Boston, Massachusetts, and the United States.
yeah, I understand that.
Burlington does not compare. You
Yeah.
also asked the question, why didn't we use 20? And that wasn't available until October 2021. So you can't compare previous years with a census data that's not available.
Yeah, but this 95.8% and 4.1%, that's for the town employees. So if we want the census data, we have those numbers too, but they're more like 75-25.
I used the data that Joanne gave to me. So maybe she needs to say what it is. Is it just for employees, or is it the people who live here?
The information that I gave you is Burlington employees, and I can't comment on the Boston, Massachusetts, and the USA data.
That's from the US Census Bureau. That's where I got the data.
Yeah, so that's population, not employees. So I was just saying for comparison, I mean, if we want to look at population, that's fine. But then we should look at Burlington population. And I think those numbers are like, I don't have them in front of me, but they're like 74-26.
Well, Joanne is also responsible for the Burlington school system, and she's responsible for the town. So
Yeah, I'm just talking about different types of data. I'm not contesting that these are incorrect numbers. I was just saying one's a town of employees, and then another number would be the actual population demographics. So, it's people living here, like everybody here, me, you. So we should look at the Burlington number, and then we can also look at what it looks like there. But I mean, if we want to compare to Boston, maybe we should look at city of Boston employees. You know what I mean? Does that make
Well,
sense?
you don't look at just people that work there. You look at the entire population.
But that's a discrepancy with, so if Burlington's numbers are only showing us our town employees,
Yeah,
and
so
everything else is based on the population of those places, then the data is skewed, right? Because to Nancy's point,
yeah, we
if
need to do.
we put Burlington's population up here, it would be a 24-73 split or whatever it is, which is much more in line with the state than than our workforce. But if we want to compare just specifically our internal Burlington municipal workforce to the workforces of Boston, Massachusetts, and the United States from a municipal standpoint, then we need to track down that municipal specific data to get a correct comparison as to how other cities and towns are hiring from a diversity standpoint. So yeah, the census data is right, and yeah, the Burlington data is right. It's just not comparable data.
Right.
I understand what you're saying. We need the data that is comparable.
Yeah, and I think we had that. I think you removed it. I was saying we should put it back in, but it wasn't an earlier version. So that was all I wanted to say, that, you know, we also need that comparison point if we're looking at that. Otherwise, like Nick said, we need the employee data for those different regions.
Are there other comments that you want to make to Joanne?
Joanne, do you know anyone in HR in Boston that we can get some specific data?
I actually don't interact with the larger cities all that much, so I don't have a contact in Boston. But I think the point is well made. I would like, and I don't want to speak for the committee. I'd like to see Burlington's employee base be a little bit more reflective, or a lot more reflective, of the Burlington community. So looking at those percentages in relation to the Burlington's census data, I think would be very important to see. But I'm also curious now. You raised my curiosity regarding how other cities and towns in Massachusetts are doing in regards to their own demographics, how their employee base in any particular city or town reflects their population data. I know that this is a conversation that we're not the only ones having. I know other communities are having the same conversation. So just to see, you know, where we are in the world and how others are doing as well, I think would be useful to know.
And that actually leads to my
Looked up the percentages for 2020 census. It's 74% white. So, you know, it's about 26%, you know, people of color. So that would be the reference point. But we can update these things.
so Joanne, to your point about, you know, not even just looking at Boston or Massachusetts, you know, or going that big, but, you know, saying, you know, what's Billerica, Wilmington, what's, you know, Lowell, what's Chelmsford, like, you know, just looking more in the Middlesex region to say, you know, if we're all having this conversation, where does everyone stand regionally? You know, I think it's great to look at, you know, Boston and Massachusetts and the nation, just, you know, from a understanding perspective. You know, but what they're doing in California and what we're doing here, I think, you know, sometimes are really just two very different things. And, you know, to be able to look at it from a regional perspective would be great. So I don't know if you have more specific contacts, you know, that maybe you could help us reach out to, or, you know, put us in contact with. You know, I don't know if this committee wants to pick, you know, a handful of towns in the region that we want to, you know, take a look at, and go from there, just for data set, you know, reasoning.
The reason we engaged in this process is to look at where Burlington is today. That's our starting point. And what you begin to do is to look at your policy procedure, you look at the numbers, and you track it going forward so that there is improvement, that you have addressed issues and people know how to perform them, and they know how we're going to measure and share information on an ongoing basis as we move forward. So that's why we're gathered the data where we are now, and then that helps us to develop the strategy on how we go forward.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that. I think that, like I said, this I mean, the correct version of this data. I won't keep saying this data as if this is what we should be pointing to, but, you know, a reflective, correct version of this data is absolutely a good benchmark for us. I think that it also wouldn't hurt to have additional data of other towns. You know, I mean, let's take Bedford, for example, right? Another town that is actively trying to recruit businesses and, you know, people to move to their community. They'd be a great, you know, neighbor for us to benchmark against as well, right? Are we doing as well, better than, worse than Bedford? Are we doing as well, better than, worse than Woburn, right? I think that those are very, you know, regional, microscopic, you know, data sets that we can look at to also benchmark ourselves against.
Well, that would be for Joanne to respond to, because she's the person who's responsible for tracking the data. and developing the relationships with people, whether she can gather the information so we can do the comparison. Have we heard from Amy?
Can I jump in with a quick question for Joanne? It's just I had trouble finding like the total number of employees for each year. So I don't know if you could just provide those or just, it wasn't obvious and I counted like some of those lines to try to get the totals, but if you have those totals already, that'd be a little easier. Because I appreciated that set of data you sent right before the meeting too. So if we could have like the total number of employees too with those, that'd be great.
Or I don't have those off the top of my head,
Yeah, that's
but
fine.
it's 300 and change each year. You know, it fluctuates a little bit, but it really is just over 300.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, Amy.
Hello,
How are you?
very well. How are you?
Good, thanks. We'd like to have everybody introduce themselves to you. Nick.
Oh, Amy, you know me, but for the sake of it,
Who is
Nick
that?
Priest, select board member and vice chair of this committee.
Okay. Carl.
Hi, Amy.
Hi,
Carl
Carl.
Foss.
Carl and I hang out at the food pantry on Saturday morning.
And food pantry volunteer, yes.
Yeah.
Nancy.
Hi, Amy. We've met. I'm in
Yep.
town meeting and
Yep.
I'm part of the Burlington Equity Coalition and Burlington Against Racism. Good to see you.
Okay.
Saeed.
Hi there, Amy. Sayed Ghani, part of this committee and a Burlington resident for the past 10 years.
Oh, good. And hi,
So, and of course, I'm BJ. And we've met.
Yep.
We started out the meeting by talking about the definition that's included on the agenda for diversity, equity, inclusion, and policy and procedure. The definitions come from the thesaurus. And then we launch into talking about each of the categories where we receive data from you. We've just finished with Joanne, so we'd like to launch into you now and just mention as we go through this what we learned, and should there be any questions, we can address it to you. You provided us with steps for a meeting, which is the visual meeting, all meetings, agenda, and the posting process minutes. And in that written information, there's no reference to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Comments? The State Ethics Commission, November 14, 2016. Part 1, Conflict of Interest Law and Purpose. Part 2, On-the-Job Restrictions. Part 3, After Hours Restrictions. Part 4, After You Leave Municipal Employment. And there was no reference to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Any comments?
the only comment I would say with that is state regulations and state laws, so we would not make changes to that. We could certainly present them with suggestions, but that would not be documents that we could make changes to.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Next item is Committee Handbook, May 1, 2014. Section 5, page 18, which was the conflict of interest. Law applies to all public officials, paid or unpaid. Private interest does not conflict with best interest of the community. Do not accept anything. Do not accept anything worth $50 or more. Do not hire, promote, supervise employment of your immediate family or your spouse's family. Do not take official action with financial interest or business partners. And it goes on with the same kind of discussion. It also is about the misuse of position, resolving door restriction, Appendix A, B, C, etc. There is no reference to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Does the DEI committee need to be added to the list for the committee handbook? Question. Comments?
Amy, in this regard, are the things listed here, the committee handbook, is that based on state law, correct?
Well, the conflict of interest stuff is, and a number of the different appendices are, but that is a document that my office created. So most certainly the addition of adding committees that are not listed. I don't believe the transportation committee is listed there either. So updating those things. And then whether there is some statement that your committee comes up with that might be wanting to be included in there, we could certainly look at that.
One of the things that we're going to suggest is what might be included in a mission statement. So that may be an option for you to consider.
Okay, good.
You gave us a document that gave us the U.S. Quick Fact town of Burlington. Population January 1, 2019, 28,627. Population January 1, 2010, 24,492. It also addressed age and sex, housing, education, health, businesses, geography, and there is no reference to diversity, equity, and inclusion.
And I guess the other thing too, I gave you that link to the quick facts. That population number from 2019 was actually an estimated number by the federal government using the American Community Survey study. That number is really out of whack. The federal number from 2020, which is now the current number that we are working with for federal census, is 26,143. Our number for 2020 in terms of the annual census that the town runs, it was 26,482. So we were pretty close to the federal number. But yeah, that's those numbers in the off years, the federal government tries to estimate stuff. So that just to update those numbers that you have.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sure.
Any other thoughts? We have the American Community Survey 5-year data, 2009 to 2019. Detailed tables, subject tables, data profiles, and comparison profiles. There is no reference to diversity, equity, and inclusion.
And I guess the question I would ask now might also go with the previous section is that what kind of references for diversity, equity, and inclusion are you looking for in these statistical tables?
Well, we don't know what's available. Our analysis is to look at the data that Joanne provided us, which was not close and needs to be adjusted. And our intake of information is just to look at where Burlington is now.
Okay.
And then based on what we see today, then develop the strategy for how we move forward. and going into the future on an annual basis, there's data that you want to look at. You want to look at policy and procedure. You want to look at, are there any complaints that need to be addressed as a result of the language that's been placed in the employee handbook or in union contracts?
Oh, okay. Okay, makes sense. I just didn't know, because usually, at least for me, that's where those tables from the census quick reference is where I usually get what our percentages are in terms of population. The census that we run does not ask questions about ethnicity or I mean, the only thing we ask in terms of country of origin or that would be that if they're not a citizen, what country are they a citizen of? So that's why I was just asking, you know, those types of things.
Yes. Well, the definitions that we follow in gathering race is based on the table that they give us
Yeah.
that deals with each one, but it doesn't address whether they are employed properly or have the right papers to certify that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But again, what we want to look at is what's the data we're gathering? What do we need to compare? It might be the race of people who live in this town and then who's employed. To compare that might be an analysis that we want to do, but that's what we have to work out.
Okay. Just curious. Yeah, I was curious on that statement.
And then you have the open meeting law guide and educational materials from December 2017, and that covered the overview, meeting of public bodies, notice, executive sessions, remote participation, minutes, open meeting law complaints, open meeting law training, contacting the Attorney General, and an appendix. And there's no reference to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Comments? Nick, who's on your lap?
This is our youngest, Margaret.
Hello, Margaret.
Say hi.
She's sweet. Any comments people want to make? Amy, you're great. Joanne, you're great. Thank you for participating.
Thank you for asking us.
Thank you.
We do have a couple more things to talk about with this group. It'll be really quick. Are there minutes? Carl? Minutes from the last meeting.
Yes, it was. Give me 1 second. We were trying to approve minutes from 12/7/21, I believe.
Okay.
Am I allowed to make the motion as a secretary, or does someone else have to make it? All right, I'll go for it. I move that we approve the minutes from 12/7/21.
Nick is shrugging.
I second.
Made and second. All in favor?
Aye.
To accept the minutes? Done. Okay.
Thank you.
2 weeks from now, the next committee meeting could be Wednesday, the 2nd of February at 6 for the DEI committee. And the agenda at that committee is to look at what have we gathered from the data and how do we put the information that we gathered to use? How do we develop the strategy? What's our next step forward that we want to present to the select board, which is set for Monday, the 14th of February at 6. So we're looking at 2 dates, the 1st of February to develop the strategy, and then on the 14th to present the strategy to the board, to the select board.
To clarify, BJ, you said February 2nd for our next meeting, right? That's a Wednesday?
It is, yes.
Okay.
So, and then a second point of clarification, the presentation to the select board is to identify where this committee's come thus far, or to present strategy, because I'm not sure that from the 2nd to the 14th,
Both.
to be able to, so I'm not sure that from the 2nd to the 14th, we're gonna be able to get to like a solid confirmed strategy that like we're all, I mean, and I could be wrong, but I'd hate to say, yeah, that's what we're aiming for and then not hit it. You know, so either, because I just assumed that we were going to be presenting like a, here's where we're at thus far and what our goals will be moving forward to the select board. So if we're hoping to present strategy, maybe we push that to the later date for the select board, the 20, I think it's the 28th. That would give us 2 meetings to fully go through and discuss strategy and, you know, I think get us into a, like, if again, if our goal is to present it at that meeting to the select board, it would get us in a much better place, I think, in terms of timing. It would also give us a chance to turn back to Joanne and Amy, Joanne more specifically, and say, does this make sense? And, you know, it would also give us an opportunity, if need be, to talk to town council or Paul, town administrator, ahead of time.
I'm confused by what you just said because you went in about 3 different circles at the same time.
Okay. So originally I thought that,
February 2nd as our next meeting, that's on a Wednesday at 6.
right.
If you are then saying that to meet with the board on the 14th is inappropriate, that we should meet a second time on 16th of February, that's 2 meetings before we meet with the board on Monday, the 28th.
Right. So I guess my larger question to this committee is, do we want to present strategy at this point, knowing that the charge of this committee is to take a year to then make all of our recommendations to the board? Or because if we go that route, then the 2nd and the 16th for the 28th makes sense. Or we go the other way and we say, no, we're not looking to present strategy. We're just looking to update the board on what we've been working on and what our goals for at least the next quarter are. In which case, the 2nd to the 14th makes sense.
I'd rather do the 3 meetings because it's not just appraising where we are. We can summarize that. We need to move ahead and recommend a strategy for the board to consider.
Okay, so then my follow-up question to that is, if we present that on the 28th, what is this committee's purpose for the remainder of the year?
It's to follow through on the strategies that we recommend.
Well, it wouldn't be us implementing them. It would be the select board and the various departments through Joanne and Amy and whoever else.
And any suggestions that they want to bring to us for us to consider. If we're recommending to the select board what they should put in a mission statement, if we agree to do that, we cannot not present something that we have in mind. Are you leaving it up to Joanne to figure out what she wants to do?
No, I guess I'm asking this committee what we want to do. I mean, we were given a year, and again, and it may have been my misunderstanding as to what our quarterly updates were intended to be to the select board. I thought that we were going to update them 3 times, once a quarter, and then our final meeting with them would be for all of our recommendations. So to Joanne's point, our strategy and our action, right, as one large plan, walk them, apologies, walk them through everything in its entirety. And that's where this committee would either be left as an ad hoc and dissolved, or the select board would request our efforts further. Guys, on the call, please quiet down. So I'm trying to rationalize, like, again, given the mission statement and the charge of this committee, if we make all of our recommendations in February, that gives us until, so I can just leave it to the committee.
Okay, Carl?
Some of the things that we discussed tonight are more time sensitive, such as if we want to recommend to the select board that they direct the town administrator to ask the unions to include certain language in contracts, that's something we could make a recommendation sooner. And then if we want to take more time to develop language that isn't time sensitive, I mean, we could recommend some things and then keep some things kind of in our, just not that we need, I don't know, I'm kind of losing my train of thought, but there are things that we should, in my mind, things that we should recommend now so that action can be taken, and then other things we can kind of save so we can continue to discuss. And sometimes language that we want to, a mission statement, for example, that could take more than just a couple weeks to develop. I think that it would, have some revisions that would be needed. And so maybe in February, then when we go to the select board at the end of February, we can have some specific things that we recommend and some other just kind of general updates. This is what we're working on now.
Right. Yeah, no, again, I'm totally fine with that. When I heard recommend our entire strategy in February, to me, that's soup to nuts, A to Z, right? That's everything. So if we want to take the time sensitive things out of order and focus on those for the recommendation, I'm totally fine with that. I'm just trying to process it in my head because I want to make sure, to your point, Carl, that we're giving this committee enough time to properly think through and vet. I mean, to our conversations earlier, we haven't even talked to Chris Hannafin or Ray Porch yet, right? So, like, there's still more gathering that can happen and more work this committee needs to undertake. I don't want us to put the cart before the horse and make either not fully thought out recommendations or things that we want to change later on if we learn something different. That's all.
I think that we should make the decision about the meeting for the 2nd of February, our next meeting, rather than lining up the two comparable ones. Does that make sense? Thank you. So we'll set February 2nd, Wednesday at 6, and we'll meet and talk about where we are and next steps.
Syed wanted to say something, I think.
Yes, thank you. So I think the confusion here is that what BJ is saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, BJ, is that we will essentially spell out our strategy to the board, which will help us reach the recommendations we will make at the end of our tenure. So we are not making recommendations on the 16th, if that
Right.
makes sense, Nick. That's what BJ is saying. So we tell them, this is what we have done thus far, board, and this is what we are planning to do going forward, so that we can then make some recommendations, down the road. We're not at that stage to make all recommendations now anyways.
Okay, I mean that's what I'm wholly aligned with,
Mhm.
and that's why. And I think that's why I was confused, because when I hear recommend strategies versus like present strategies and goals as like a general, those to me those are two different things. So I'm just we're on the same page. And then to Carl's point about the more time sensitive things,
Right.
to try and get in front of union negotiations, that's fine as well.
Mhm.
So yeah, if we're gonna go that route, then the 2nd and the 16th for meetings for us, with a meeting to get on the agenda with the select board on the 28th, I think is an appropriate timeline for us to get some work done.
Okay. Any other thoughts, comments? A motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Thank you for coming, Amy and
Thank you.
Joanne. Appreciate
Thank
your
you.
support and help.
Thank
Have a
you,
good
Talk
evening,
to
For
you.
everybody.
everything you do.
Bye. Thank you all.
Everybody.
Bye.
Bye.